Hello and welcome to this week's soon-to-be award-winning back chat here on Premier Sports TV and from the Arc in Headingley. And as ever, we've got an illustrious panel of talkers to talk for the next hour or so, including Danny Lockwood, who's the publisher of League Weekly, Gareth Walker from the Mirror newspapers, and Martyn Sadler from League Express and Rugby League World. As ever, so much to talk about, but let's first reflect on what's just happened, the Challenge Cup quarterfinals. Maybe not the quality of matches that we would have hoped for from a pure rugby league point of view, Martyn, but the excitement, fantastic.
Well, I think the heat affected the games, Dave, didn't it? I mean, interestingly, after the Warrington-Wigan game, the two coaches said that the ball had been really difficult to handle, in you know, very sticky and a bit slippy, and it certainly showed when you looked at the total handling errors. They were enormous in that game, and that was characteristic of all the games, really. But a lot of people do like to point out that when there are a lot of errors in a game, at least, you know, there's a lot of broken field play, and it does tend to add to the excitement. And I don't think you could say that the entertainment value wasn't pretty high in at least 3 out of the 4 games. Obviously, Leeds hammered Featherstone 58-0, so that was obviously the one-sided exception to the rule. But the other games, I thought, all had a lot going for them. In particular, I thought it was interesting to see Sam Tomkins coming back and John Bateman for Wigan, who both had great games, I thought. And Sam Tomkins, of course, he landed the field goal that clinched the game for Wigan, and Warrington couldn't replicate that right at the end of the game with Dec Patton. So, you know, it's a tremendous match and a great finish to the game, and must have been incredibly disappointing for Warrington supporters, I would think.
So a couple of great quotes. The game after the Wigan game, Joe Burgess obviously put that restart straight out of the play, and a great tweet from him, wasn't it, saying that he was thinking about changing his career and changing his name and moving house and all the rest of it. And the other lovely quote was from Lee Radford, hot day at Hull, and so we had 3 ginger lads out there, so it was a miracle. So I mean, some great characters.
Yeah, I don't know if the hot and slippy ball was entirely to blame. I think that the games, the quarterfinals, or certainly Hull and Cass, Warrington, Wigan particularly, were a bit symptomatic of what we've seen all year, Dave. Lots of excitement, but lots of flaws in there. Yeah. That notwithstanding, you know, the fact that it went down to the wire, that it kept literally the crowds on the edge of the seat was good for the viewers. But I have to say, you look at that Wigan side now, you look at, there was Anthony Gelling back as well. I think they had 13 or 14 out of the first 17 players, you know, in the squad numbers back. You kind of think, this is Wigan now. Their season starts now.
They're getting back on track, aren't they?
It needs to, and I still think that the cup is their better chance of glory than anything in the league. Yeah. But I think Salford will be looking at that semi-final draw and thinking, this isn't the Wigan that we would have played 3 or 4 weeks ago.
And I tell you what's interesting about all of this is that, you know, everybody's like Hull against Castleford, best match of the round, the 2 form teams, and Hull go through, and Wigan against Warrington, you know, 2 giants who are just having a bit, and Salford against Wakefield, you know, 2 clubs, and Leeds just quietly slip into the semi-finals, and that seems to be their season. Leeds, suddenly everyone looks around and goes, look at Leeds, semi-finals of the cup and looking really good in the top 4.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after that horrendous defeat at Castleford early on, 66-10, I think people just decided they were going to write Leeds off at that point. But since then, completely under the radar, really. They've just kept winning matches, and they've been playing good rugby as well. I don't think, you know, everyone's been talking about Cass's style and Salford even, but Leeds are a side that like to use the ball as well, and I think they've gone under the radar in that sense too, not just in the winning games.
Yeah. So what about the semis? What about the semis, fellas? I mean, 6 weeks, it's hard to call a semi 6 weeks out, but Leeds against Hull, and Doncaster, that's going to be a sellout, that's going to be fantastic. Wigan against Salford at once.
On the Leeds point that Gareth made there, the one thing I'm uneasy about the Cup generally is that Leeds are in the semi-finals, having played 3 teams, the best of which was a full division below them, having accumulated 198 points, and basically having had 3 weekends off. They're going to be very well rested. You know, I think I do worry for the future of the Cup with what we've seen and the way that we're running.
But that's the nature of the Cup, isn't it?
That's the way the Cup draws.
Because if teams, you know,
it's always been the case.
I don't think. I think the way that it hasn't, Martyn, because you've got 8 teams that are not coming in. They've got to play 2 semi-professional sides.
I still
to
feel
get
it should
right
be
into
an earlier, if anything. You know.
Well, that's certainly a debatable point. But in any cup competition, you always find that some clubs have an easier run than others.
Yeah.
That's the charm of the cup in a
And
curious way.
you also get that situation very often, where in the old draw, is that you get a team in the semi-finals who really probably shouldn't be there because they've had a lucky passage.
But it's an open draw and everybody's been playing everybody.
Think about Toulouse a few years ago.
Yeah, well, they did beat Witness.
But even so.
Yeah.
But,
and they were beating Leeds at half time.
I think Hull and Leeds obviously is a toss-up just because they're two teams that deserve to be in the top four, that both seem to be getting personnel back. I know Snead's gone and we don't know what's happening with Gareth Ellis, but Leeds look to be a really healthy outfit, and I think when they've got Maguire and Moon fit in the middle, they'll test anybody, and they've got the big game mentality.
I think Hull's pack though looks really impressive this year.
It did against.
They really blasted Castleford, didn't they? Let's face it. They've got size, power, and ability.
Well, you say the pack; they've got a 13-man pack, basically.
Well, that's how it looks. But I think Hull will be a real challenge for Leeds. I think that's a game really to look forward to. I think I'd favour Hull very slightly at the moment. I think Jake Connor's doing quite a good job for them, stepping in for Mark Snead, and
it surprised me. I've
kicking the goals.
I've been impressed by Connor.
Yeah. He's a very intelligent player, I think.
And he's another physical player, though, isn't he? You say about 13-man pack, and he's a big halfback, isn't he, as well? And he gives
everybody except Jamie Shaw, really.
He's just on the back of it. So the finalists, then. Okay, Gareth. First of all, you pick the short straws going first.
I still, if you look at that Wigan team, I agree with Danny. Kind of when you look at it now, it looks a lot more imposing than it did 3 or 4 weeks ago, even. So I still fancy Wigan just to come through. The other game is a toss of a coin. I was interested to hear Lee Radford say after the match about how much emphasis they've put this season on peaking at the right time, and they haven't been at the best in recent weeks, and certainly haven't been as consistent as Leeds, but I think they're looking down the line a bit, so maybe they might just edge it, but I think that could be a real classic semi-final.
Okay, so who are you going for then?
Wigan and Hull.
Wigan and Hull, thank you.
And I'm just the same. I think Hull's win last year at Wembley will have boosted their confidence enormously when it comes to the Cup, and I think they'll be very keen to get a second helping of that glory. And a few years ago they played Wigan at Wembley. It was a terrible game, and they put in a terrible performance. One of the worst Challenge Cup we've seen for many years. I think if they went again and played Wigan again, it would be quite a different game.
They've got big game players now.
No, absolutely.
I think the big thing here is that Salford have got a little bit of a wobble on at the moment, and this Wigan team, if we can keep Tompkins and O'Loughlin especially and Bateman all fit, they'll have had a few more league games under the belt. I fear for Salford in that semi-final, if I'm honest. So I think it's Wigan, and just to be contrary, I'll say Leeds.
Okay, fair enough. But that could be massive for Salford. If Salford win that semi-final and get to the final, that good for the game? I throw that question out there.
Well, we all want to see new clubs getting to major finals, don't we? I mean, obviously the problem with Salford is the Challenge Cup final's been struggling to sell itself in recent years, and you'd imagine if Salford got there, it might struggle even more. So, I dare say the RFL might think Wigan and Leeds or Hull would be a preferable
What's the most
outcome.
famous Challenge Cup final in your living memory, would you say?
Sheffield and Wigan, probably.
Exactly. And how many did Sheffield take to Wembley? And how many people say, there weren't any there that day, when they remember that final?
66,000, I think the crowd was that day.
Well, apart from you then.
Yeah.
You can remember how many were there.
Yeah, at the point, Salford in the final would be great for the game.
Yeah.
It really would. It would be the boost that they really do need. They need something to light the fire. Maybe that would be it, Dave. I'm not so sure it would be, but you'd have to cross your fingers, because if that didn't, nothing would.
Well, it did a lot for Salford when they got to the Challenge Cup final in 1969, if you can remember that far back. Wow. Those were the days when Salford were just building up.
Yeah.
They'd signed David Watkins from Welsh Rugby Union, players like Mike Coolman. They'd really spent heavily under Brian Snape, and getting to Wembley, although they lost to Castleford that year, it really did a lot for them over the next few years, and their crowd shot up tremendously at the Willows.
Yeah.
So I think it would do a lot for them. For some reason, they seem to go under the radar, despite being in the middle of Greater Manchester, right next to the M62. They don't seem able to promote themselves very, very well. But certainly, if they were at Wembley, I think they couldn't help but promote themselves, could they? You would hope.
Yeah. And although I did tip Wigan, but we shouldn't write Salford off because they are where they are in Super League by merit. They've beaten these top teams this year. They have had a little bit of a wobble recently.
Well, they won at
against
Wigan,
Wakefield.
they?
They won at Wigan.
They won at Wigan.
Against Wakefield, they look like something more back towards what they're doing. And if you've got Dobson, Louis, Carney, and that team, there's no writing them off, I don't think.
Yeah, well, you can afford to leave Carney on the bench for 67, 68 minutes and then bring him on at the end. That shows how good they are. People forget that Bradford Bulls, this iconic Super League club, and we'll talk a little bit about their current state later in the programme, But they weren't an iconic rugby league club in 1995. But when they went to Wembley in '96, suddenly that was there.
Yeah.
Beginnings.
But I think that you're talking about a slightly different model anyway, Dave.
Yeah.
And they were a sleeping giant at that time. And you know, just as that great rugby community is still there in Bradford, I'm not sure that the same pertains in terms of where Salford are today. We shall see. I mean, they're going the other way faster, Bradford, at the moment. But I just think we all cross our fingers and hope that Wakefield can make it stick and get some bodies back in Super League, that Salford can see out a season, you know, without running out of gas. All big questions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a new coach in town. Well, maybe not quite in town, but at Catalan, Steve McNamara. And that's gone quite a little bit under the radar, hasn't it? His appointment, because Catalan are perhaps out of the spotlight over here. But what do you make of that? Steve McNamara, new Catalan coach.
Really interesting and good to see him back in Super League. I think whatever people think about Steve and his record and his England, everybody likes Steve McNamara. He's a great guy. He's been good with the media.
Not always good with the media.
Well, for
You
the
were at
most
the press
part.
conference in Cardiff.
For the most part.
When he could hit the bus back, you know.
I think from what we believe that Catalans listened a lot to Trent Robinson, who they still hold in very high regard. When they were making this appointment, Steve obviously worked with him at the Roosters. He's got a fair bit of NRL experience under his belt since he's left England, so it's an interesting appointment, isn't it? He's got a big task on his hand, hasn't he? They look like they're heading for the qualifiers, so he's getting thrown straight into the fire if they do that, and it's a massive first 3 4 months.
What a first game Saturday. Warrington against Catalan, and how important that game is to both those clubs.
Interestingly, the Catalans' first choice was apparently Tony Smith, the guy they would really have liked to sign, and they couldn't. I don't know whether he didn't want to leave Warrington or Warrington didn't want him to leave, but Steve was second choice, I believe, in relation to Tony. So it's going to be a really interesting game this weekend, given that they're going to be clashing. I think Steve. The thing that Steve will bring is a level of organisation to the Catalans, which I don't think they've had until now. He's a very meticulous, very well organised person. You know, we saw that with when he was the England coach, and I'm sure that was the same at the Roosters when he was working there with their reserve grade sides and so on. And I think that's what the Catalans do need at the moment. I mean, the problem that club has had is that their recruitment has been terrible over the last 12 or 18 months. You know, the players they've got are really, they're not appropriate for them, they don't gel together, and it's just been a shambles, really.
It's not just the last 12 or 18 months, Martyn, it's year after year after year, isn't it? And I think that their lousy recruitment has carried on with the appointment of Steve McNamara.
Are you not harsh to judge? Because I mean, it was a Bradford club.
It was a failure at Bradford.
Bradford were on the skids financially. Yeah. He went to England, he coached England, he was only one penalty away from taking England to a World Cup final, and he guided them to a series win against New Zealand.
Against a New Zealand reserve team, and that was the sum total.
It was a New Zealand team.
And we never made any progress. We never made any progress, Dave. And then he goes to the NRL, where the Roosters had been a champion team, and while he was there with Trent Robinson, they went into the doldrums. Trent thinks so highly of him that he let him go to the New Zealand Warriors, who again have hit the skids. So I don't see where. I'd love to have a look at whoever's written Steve McNamara's CV for him, because they must do a hell of a job.
I think the Warriors were in the skids before Steve McNamara.
If you talk about England, have England been any better since Steve McNamara left? Were they any better in last year's Four Nations under Wayne Bennett than they were under Steve McNamara?
Not at all.
I think that we have some systemic problems, but I think that part of them has been, you know, we had 4 years, I thought, in the wilderness under Steve McNamara for England.
You look at McNamara's record at Bradford, and certainly they didn't win trophies or even come anywhere near winning them. But what they did while he was there, they brought through some really fine young players. You know, McNamara's strength was bringing young players.
Is that good enough for
Catalans?
Well, that's something Catalans need to improve.
That's something they've messed up on, isn't it?
The number of French players playing away from them now.
A lot of the young French players have left the Catalans and gone to other clubs and have played better at other clubs than.
I mean, I agree with you about the organisation. He's meticulous. He does everything by the book, does Steve? You know, including when he famously phoned Danny Brough up and told him, "We won't need you all year, mate." And the guy went on and was man of steel. So I don't know how you can even square that logically on any level. But Steve managed to, and of course, and I thought the meltdown we then saw with his media relationships kind of finished him for me.
Right. I'll tell you what's going to be interesting. If Catalan finish in the bottom 4, and the middle 8 includes Catalan and Toulouse.
Absolutely,
That's and London Broncos as well. I mean, that's going to be a real spicy mix.
There's so much unpredictability this year in the qualifiers more than ever. I mean, there's a run of fixtures depending on where you finish, where you could be travelling to Toulouse, to Catalans, to London. Yeah. They're tricky games.
Yeah.
And
I mean, at least Super League is going to, the top 8s are going to give us a little bit more, I think, this year than they did last year. I think the qualifiers, you're right, that's going to be really spicy. And we were talking about Wigan in regards to the Cup, Dave, but you look at the league table now, they're in 8th spot. They've got to make up a lot of ground if they're going to have a shot at the top 4. Well, but you know that they're going to be firing in a way that Wakefield weren't last year.
Interesting fixtures this weekend. Wigan at Huddersfield. You know, teams 7 and 8, both level on points, 3 points ahead of the bottom 4. So again, whoever wins that game probably is going to be safe in the top 8. Whoever loses it will still be looking over the shoulders, won't they? Particularly when you think Warrington and Catalans, one of those teams will only be a point behind them.
I think
after this
play
weekend.
Huddersfield as well.
I think they do. Yeah,
I think they play a lot of the
some
teams
really
around.
interesting games.
I find it difficult to see the bottom 4 at the moment climbing back out of it, given the form of the teams directly above them.
Well, somebody said to me at weekend, Wigan are still third favourites with some bookies for the title, in 8th position and all that ground to make up.
They've got to make up something like.
But they're the one team who you wouldn't put it past.
10 points in what we got now. We've got 12 games. That's a lot of ground to make up.
But
it is possible, and it's more likely than recently. As like you say, it should be better because they're.
Of all teams that could do it, you would say that a fully fit Wigan would be that side.
Just to bring that circle right round to its conclusion, we're talking about the Challenge Cup and Widnes going to Toulouse and losing. That'll send a few shivers through Widnes supporters, won't it? The fact that they might have to play Toulouse in the bottom 8s as well. That's it for the first part. We're back with lots more lively chatter in part 2.
If you think rugby league's just a game for youngsters, think again. Masters Rugby League is a new form of the game, specially created for the over 35s. From full contact to non-contact, there's a pair of shorts for everyone. Get fit, make friends, have fun. To find your nearest Masters Rugby League club, just search Masters Rugby League online or drop us an email.
So welcome back to part 2 of Rugby League Back Chat from the Arc at Headingley. Just to reintroduce our guests for you, Danny Lockwood, Martyn Sadler and Gareth Walker. We were talking about the playoffs, we got onto the playoffs, and it's going to be fascinating again this year, isn't it? I think this is the year that the 8s really come into their own, because Wigan, St Helens are going to be, maybe Warrington are going to be at the bottom end of the 8s, and they're all capable of putting runs on that puts pressure on whoever finishes in the top 4.
Yeah.
And that's probably been the biggest criticism in the last couple of years, hasn't it? I think people have enjoyed the qualifiers, there have been some great games. We haven't had that mad scramble for the 4 everywhere. We've got 2 or 3 teams that could get into the 4 at the end and going down to the wire, and it looks more likely that we could get a scenario like that this year.
What's happened in the past, in the past couple of years, is that some clubs have just edged into the top 8 after 23 rounds, but they've been so relieved just to get there that they've sort of given up on the season in a way. I don't think you can say that about Wigan and Saints, and probably Huddersfield too. You know, they won't be satisfied with just being in the top 8, but they will want to try and make up the ground on the teams above them. And of course, some of the teams above them, teams like Salford and Wakefield and so on, well, all of them really, you know, you might think are potentially vulnerable to, you know, going on a losing run as opposed to these other teams going on a winning run.
Will you be interested to see what happens at Wakefield now? Because what happened last year was they won the quarter-final of the Cup, and I think the week after or the week before they'd secured their place in the top 8, and that was it. I don't think they won a game for the rest of the season.
They've really been symbolic of what's been wrong with the system, if anything has. The year before, they just geared up for the qualifiers.
Yeah.
Last year, they scraped into the 8 and they gave up.
Yeah.
You know, they've got thin resources.
They've got a chance of the 4 this
They
time.
have
That's
this
the
time.
difference.
And they're very conscious of that, and straight after the
Michael
defeat.
Carter has done an absolutely terrific job, as Chris Chester. They're not the story this year. I think the story this year is, Lee saved the 12s and 8 system by getting promotion, and not just getting promotion, but doing it before the £1 million game. The question now, and the first poser that we do have, is can a demoted team bounce back? And that is what Hull KR face, and I think that is it's the $64 million question for the £1 million game, Dave. Are they good enough realistically to beat either Widnes or Lee? I think that's the question.
Or are they good enough to do what Lee did last year? Well, I mean, is that a potential? I mean, we mentioned in the first part. You've got that kind of what's going to happen because of the potential of having 2 trips to France, of going to London. It's going to be a tough 7 or 8 weeks. That
unpredictability throws open a few more possibilities, I think. Because if you finish in the top 2 in the Championship, you get those 4 home games as well, don't you? Whereas if you're at the bottom end of Super League, if your away fixtures fall badly and you do end up in Catalans and Toulouse and London, a lot more travelling involved, and I think we'll get some more unpredictable results. So
the team that's really excelled actually this season so far, and probably will get 4 home games, is London Broncos. They've really come on strong, haven't they? It's been quite fantastic, really, what they've done, I think, this year. They're still not getting great support, but I think they're going to be a danger to anybody else.
It's been a quiet renaissance, hasn't it? I think Andrew Henderson's been absolutely
brilliant,
terrific. Coach of the year there for me. And I think that it'll be interesting to see what they bring into that mix. I don't think that they're realistic promotion prospects, but I think that they will.
But they're not entirely unrealistic, though. That's the point. They've got a chance, haven't they?
What about a £1 million game between Catalan and Toulouse? How good would that be? Where would they play that? Carcassonne.
Or is it the €900,000 game?
It'll be the €1.2 million game at that point. The way the exchange rate's going. Well, that would be terrific, wouldn't it? I'm not necessarily thinking it'd be great for the TV broadcasters, but
I don't think it realistically that it will happen either, Dave.
No.
But it will be a pretty cosmopolitan mix with London, probably 2 French teams in there.
I mean, there will be a game between Toulouse and Catalan, won't there? So either one or the other. It would be great to see it in Toulouse, actually.
Unless Steve McNamara turns it around. Let's not.
If we throw Toronto into the mix next year, then crikey, what a you'll need to make sure your passport's got plenty of empty pages in it for the qualifiers next year.
I tell you, we're not throwing in this year, and probably not next year. The way it's gone is Bradford. And what has happened to the Bradford Bulls?
I think it would have been better if they'd have taken the full punishment and gone down to League One this year, taken relegation, and then had a year to stabilise, get the money right, get the squad right, get Jeff Tuvey or whomever their visa in less than 6 months, and build and be back in the Championship next year, because as it looks right now, I can't see any way that they won't be in League One.
Oh, well, no.
It probably would have been, but it's that's being wise after the event, I suppose, isn't it? Now we've got what we've got. We can't turn the clock back and put them back in League One this season. They're clearly going to be relegated, assuming that the league structure next year is
that's the big if that's hanging over
the same as it is this year. I mean, there are still some people who suggest that Super League will be recast to have Bradford and Hull KR in it, with 14 teams at some stage. So who knows? The Super League clubs have held this meeting last week, and the things that have come out after it seem to suggest that they're all very unhappy with the current league structure, and they want to reform it once again.
But for Bradford, it's going to require some kind of divine intervention.
Is it right that the game restructures itself for the sake of a club who were big for 10 years?
No, and they should have learned this from this artificial thing in the first place, because as Danny said, the punishment, as followed by other clubs in that situation, like Sheffield who reformed, etc., was to start at the bottom. Now, Bradford this year could have had this exciting young team, which they have got. Let's not forget, they've got a lot of very good young players that they've produced themselves in that team, but throwing them into the unforgiving environment of the Championship is a real tough ask. If they'd been winning matches in League One, which they should have been in League One for my opinion, and there was plenty of people who said at the time that's what should have happened.
Yeah.
The people I think they'd have got more momentum behind them because people would have been excited about winning matches. They're still on -2. How depressing is that as a fan? You look at the table, they're on -2.
The thing is, they've had a bit of bad luck as well, of course, partly with the delay over Tuvey, but Dane Chisholm, they get him back on board and he immediately gets injured.
Talk about the delay over Tuvey. Why has the visa not gotten through? My understanding was because they didn't have an English bank account.
Well,
it took them longer to set up logistics like that. But again, surely it would have been better doing that at the bottom end.
And to be fair, it was a poisoned chalice to start with. Where all these people were putting their hand up saying that they were bidding for the Bradford franchise, most of those weren't realistic.
No.
Andrew Chalmers and Graham Lowe have come in. Chalmers, I understand, is very much in it for the long game. He'll take the punishment, he'll build, he'll come back. Now, if he's had a word to the wise from whomever, that there may be a shortcut back to glory, and there may be more money to throw at the bank to throw at Tuvey in a brand new squad. Because I know what Gareth's saying about the young players, fine, but that is a tough environment, is the Championship. And from what I've seen of them, there's not a lot in there that's beating that's going to convince Mr. Tuvey that he's got a squad that's anything like. Well,
surely learn your lesson from that when you're talking about throwing them up again. You can't just build a team from scratch. They should be building on the strengths, which they've got a good junior system, which they've kept. Full credit to the owners. They've kept that in place and stuff like that.
You don't win anything with kids.
But you might do in 5 years' time if you keep those systems in place rather than artificially putting them somewhere.
But they won't keep those systems in place in League One, will they? Let's face it.
I don't know.
There isn't the money there. There isn't the money there.
And if they get relegated, that will be it for their academy system.
So that is it. As far as Bradford is concerned, you think
they'll be struggling.
Unless there's a restructure, that's it, that Bradford's gone as a realistic entity.
Well,
as a potential
they could go down into League One and then get promoted back again, couldn't they?
Because, well, they would. You'd have to think
you've got to assume so.
Yeah.
And who knows? It's very hard to. The trouble is when you've got this system that we've now got, it's really unpredictable. You can't say. You can't look beyond a year or two, can you, and say who's going to thrive and
as you say, we don't even know what the Super League clubs are going to decide they want next year. So,
because the thing about restructuring as well, and you keep Bradford in the Championship, they then would be in a Championship next year that would include a big spend in Toronto, that would potentially include either a Hull KR who will still have big ambitions, or a Super League club that's come down that will have ambitions to go back. Some very effectively functioning clubs in there, like potentially London, like Sheffield, Featherstone, Halifax, etc.
I mean, Bradford on Sunday lost to Rochdale. I think it's widely accepted, had the lowest budget in the competition. They lost heavily at Dewsbury not long ago, who would be working on similar kind of numbers. These clubs are kind of used to getting the most out of limited resources and are battle hardened at that level. And Bradford have a young team with players coming and going at times on loan and things, and it's just not worked out for them.
But they also have a coach, don't they, who's just not familiar with the Championship and with doing what you've just said, getting the most out of very, very limited resources. Jeff Tuvey coached at Manly in the NRL, and it's chalk and cheese, isn't it? When you go from there to being in the Championship and coaching a side that's really very limited and very young. I just wonder, the thing about the Championship is you need a coach who understands how to get out of that division and up into Super League.
I suspect Tuvey's found it very frustrating dealing with part-time players who I'm sad to say too many of whom have got a part-time attitude and a part-time commitment.
But they're full-time, aren't they, Bradford? For what it's worth this year, that squad is full-time.
A lot of them are, but you've got guys there, Gareth, that have just never been used to operating at the level that they've had to. And I understand from Tuvey that he's been really frustrated by the lack of sort of grit and mongrel out of a team that, I think he thought he was inheriting better than he got.
His team doesn't reflect his own personality, does it? If you remember what he was like as a player, talk about grit and mongrel, that was really part of his makeup. He was incredible.
Let's just reflect on a team that we've not talked about for a while, I don't think, on this programme, and yet we cover quite extensively on Premier Sports. Toronto. Here we are, more than midway through the season. They're still winning games by an average of 60 points a match. I think they're conceding 10 points a match on average. What have we made so far of the Toronto experiment, Gareth?
From what I've seen, I mean, the most exciting thing is when you see them playing in Toronto, isn't it? in this new environment. The team that they've got is largely made of lads with sim play who are good players. You know, they're a top end championship, maybe above side. So the excitement isn't in winning heavily away at Keighley and Workington or wherever it might be. It's in seeing this amazing new place where there's 7,000 people rocking up to watch a sport that they don't know a lot about.
Yeah.
I've found that invigorating watching that and listening to the players and coaches talk about what the atmosphere is like at the ground. That's what the people who put Toronto in here wanted. And I think we've had it so far. You know, the one-sided scorelines aren't ideal, but I was always a supporter of them starting at the bottom end. That will change as they move up. That when they get in the championship, they'll find it's tougher again. But it's what we've seen over on that side of the world that's excited me most so far.
Yeah.
Well, Eric Perez was quoted as saying that rugby league is the most Canadian sport that was not played in Canada. And the crowd response seems to justify that comment, doesn't it? Because, you know, the crowds, insofar as you can gauge it when you watch them on TV, really seem to have taken to the game. And, you know, the crowds that they've had, only a limited number of games so far, but the crowds have been pretty steady. You know, they've not dropped off. I must admit I anticipated a significant drop-off after the first game, which you very often have with a new rugby league venture. But that's, if anything, it's gone the other way. More people have come on board, you know, to experience what's happening there. And the publicity in Toronto itself, if you've seen some of the TV channels covering what they've done, it's been terrific. I think.
I think we all had fingers firmly crossed when, you know, because it was so experimental. But I know an old sort of teammate of mine who lives out in Toronto now, and he's, you know, he and his wife, they're there for every game. They love it. They say the city has taken to it. There is a knowledge. There is a knowledge of rugby generally, because it's a big rugby union city, and there are a few kind of grassroots amateur clubs. So it isn't, you know, and the format of rugby league is actually ideal for anybody that is familiar with either American football or Canadian football, and I think they've explained it well. Or ice hockey. They've certainly tried to bring the brutality. They've brought back the biff of the Toronto team. But so far so good, Dave.
Yeah, I mean, it is astonishing that you've got Salford, who are getting a third of the crowd. Toronto are getting 3 times as big a crowd as Salford, and maybe the Salford lot should fly over to Toronto and find out what the secret is.
Give tickets. They brought a fresh approach.
Well, they're giving tickets away. They're only getting 2,500.
They brought a fresh approach, haven't they? So I've enjoyed reading these stories about colour features by the feature writers in the Canadian newspapers, because they're looking at the sport from different eyes than we are. We go every weekend, and that's been. And I think the club themselves have brought a new attitude. So some of their social media stuff, they're trying to make stars out of their players, you know, like League One players. They're building them up and saying, this is Liam Kay and this is what he does and this is his nickname, a bit of music, and it's just a fresh approach.
And that's the difference. That's the difference compared to Salford. If you think about who's the most famous person at Salford, Martyn Kukash. Yeah, indeed, and that's why they're not successful. That's why they're not drawing crowds.
Well, I think it's bigger than that, Martyn.
Well, bigger, but that's certainly one of the basic reasons.
Yeah,
it does ask. I think it does beg the question: if Toronto do go on next year and make a real success of it in the championship, will we then develop the whole sort of franchise debate about whether we have a Super League team in Coventry or Philadelphia or New York?
Well, let's get Toronto in Super League first. If they get in Super League, does Super League want Toronto? Does Super League need Toronto? Does Rugby League need Toronto?
I don't think Super League wants Toronto. At least a lot of the clubs don't.
Yeah. Why would they be against it? When we've heard this, that some Super League clubs don't want them up there. Why would they be against it?
Well, I suppose because of financial reasons. I suppose what they're thinking is that, you know, the Catalans, for example, never bring any supporters to their home games. So I suppose they're thinking the same thing would happen with Toronto.
But the stat I'm really interested in this year is how many of the League One clubs that play Toronto at home have their biggest crowd of the season against Toronto. Now, I suspect there'll be a few looking at the early ones because it is an occasion, you know, the Canadians are coming to town. Now, to me, it's up to the Super League clubs, if and when that happens, to make it this occasion that we've got a Canadian team coming over, and watch them.
The Super League clubs are incredibly
support.
They're incredibly inward-looking, aren't they? They don't seem to have a commitment to expanding the sport and going to new frontiers, which was the whole idea of Super League back in 1995 when Maurice Lindsay spoke enthusiastically about teams in Barcelona and Timbuktu and goodness knows where, you know, and that was the idea. But that seems to have now
as Martyn
been
knows
shelved.
Every bit as much as I do in the jobs that we do, the Super League clubs talk to themselves. And they talk to their own fans, and they are myopic beyond belief.
It's always been the same. Always been the same. 1950s, let's not let television in because it might damage the crowd.
I think we have had moments, the Peter Deacon era and things, but I'm not convinced that they've got the vision that the sport deserves.
Yes, indeed. That's it for part 2. We're back with part 3 in just a moment. Maybe you will be star of the show because you've got a chance to put your own selfie on to ask one of the questions for one of the panel, and we'll see you with that in just a few moments' time.
If you think rugby league's just a game for youngsters, think again. Masters Rugby League is a new form of the game, specially created for the over 35s. From full contact to non-contact, there's a pair of shorts for everyone. Get fit, make friends, have fun. To find your nearest Masters Rugby League club, just search Masters Rugby League online or drop us an email.
Welcome to part 3 of this month's Back Chat from the Arc in Headingley, and this is the chance where you get to put your views to the Back Chat panel as well. If you've not already done so, go to our Twitter account @RLBackChat and you can find out all the details of how to do it. So let's get the first of those comments, and this is from Ron Knox, who's a London Broncos fan.
I sense there's a major opportunity coming up for the game. So my question for you today is, what will Super League look like in 5 years' time?
So thank you, Ron, asking what will Super League look like in 5 years' time. So Gareth Walker, I'll put this to you first. What will Super League look like in 5 years' time?
Well, we've just spoken about Toronto, haven't we? And I'd like to see them in Super League, see what they can bring to the game at the top level. We've had a taste of this new outlook on the game, kind of taking it to new audiences. If this experiment's going to work, they need to be in Super League at some point. So I'd like to see them in there, see what they can bring to the table.
It's not changed much in the last 5 years, so should we expect much change in the next 5 years?
Well, if you look at Super League 5 years ago, there were 14 teams in it, including Bradford and London, and Hull Kingston Rovers, of course. So it's contracted since then. I'd like to see Super League, you know, plan to expand in the future. I'd like to see it ultimately going up to 16 clubs, perhaps in 2 conferences of 8. You know, you assume that Toronto might well be in there at that point. I would hope that London Broncos would be as well, perhaps Toulouse as well, who knows, and Hull Kingston Rovers and so on. You know, I think we've got to, if a sport doesn't look to, if you don't expand, you just stand still, and if you stand still, you're going nowhere by definition. So I think I'd like to see that, you know, visionary zeal coming back into Super League, which we just seem to be lacking.
Well, I think we always have it and talk it without ever quite doing it. So I think there will be a bit of a back to the future element to the game in 5 years' time. I do think that the 12s and 8s will have had its shelf life. It'll be passed over. 14 teams, 15, 16 teams. If the NRL can do it, why can't we? I think that gives plenty of room for accommodating the legitimate big guns. I do think that we may see some natural wastage. Whether that is a Widnes, a Leah Salford, you know, with respect to all the great efforts and great clubs that they are, I'd love to think that we would have a Boston Patriots team in there alongside Toronto, and that we would have seized the global opportunity. If the NFL can fill out Wembley 3 times a year, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to bestride the Atlantic and make rugby league the great global game, Dave, that we always say it is, without ever doing what's required to make it.
But that's the thing, you know, Danny, are we ever going to get into a situation where we understand how to promote Rugby League and Super League properly, because we don't really, do we, at the moment?
Well, we can't fill Wembley once a year,
No,
can we, without
we're just
event?
we're just not effective. You know, the RFL, for whatever reason, is just not effective at promoting wider interest in rugby league. I think we've got
I think there'll be
a great game.
Within 5 years, I think we will have a new generation of leadership. I think we will have to have had within the sport. And I think, you know, Roger Draper is still finding his feet, running both Super League and the commercial side of the RFL. I think there is big systemic change to come at the top of the game, and that'll define what we look like.
Gareth, one of the issues when Super League was born, this visionary, you know, 2 clubs in France was the big vision. Mergers was also, you know, the big issue that never happened. Should we be talking about mergers?
Not for me. I was never a fan of that, and I'm not a fan of dropping clubs in either. I think they should work their way up like Toronto, but to me, mergers is a no.
Yeah,
I'm just glad we don't have the Lancashire and Yorkshire Cup anymore, because Toronto would have to play in the Lancashire Cup, wouldn't they? Because they're west of the Pennines.
Probably.
Sorry,
yes.
Martyn, you were going to say?
Well, I was going to say mergers is the one word that should be asterisked out of any rugby league article, shouldn't it? We
didn't do Hull any harm. Hull and Gates, they thrived.
After a fashion.
Yeah.
A circuitous route.
But that's another club, isn't it? Newcastle Thunder. Are they one day going to come through and really?
They've had good crowds this year at times.
They've
Again, they're up in 4 figures.
It's a really tidy stadium up there.
They've picked themselves up, haven't they? This year?
Have, yes,
They've
they
really
have.
picked themselves up. So there are some good news. There are some good news stories coming through, just not enough right now.
Okay, I'm not sure we quite answered that one, but let's see if we can not quite answer another one. Here's our next video clip.
Hello, my name's Chris and I'm a Wakey fan. My question is, which Scottish, Irish or Welsh player would get into the so-called British Lions team?
Okay, thanks, Chris. So what about that? How many... Is he missing the point there? Because I don't think Great Britain Lions is not so much about who plays for them, it's about that brand, isn't it? Because the Aussies love it. And as soon as you mention Great Britain, the national media over here just got a little bit of a frenzy again.
I do think, I agree with you there. I think the Lions brand is, you know, it used to belong to us. We've had it taken away from us to a great extent. I think it's about the tour. It's about the tour experience. It is about the shared heritage. I don't know if we can bring Brian Carney in as part of the coaching staff, and maybe he'll count for Ireland. Danny Brough is the obvious one if he's still, you know, got his Zimmer frame in working order by the time the Lions tour comes around.
You mentioned Lachlan Coote as well.
Lachlan Coote and Kane Linnett were 2 stars of Scotland's Great Four Nations last year, even though they are sort of Scozzies. Beyond that, you are struggling a little bit to think of natural, you know, sort of qualifiers, but we are a couple of years away.
I'll throw one in. Regan Grace at St Helens, just coming through the Welsh born, come through the Welsh systems as well before he
like
got
Ben
picked up.
Flower as a more obvious example.
And to me, this is an argument that's thrown up a lot.
And
is there room for any English players in this Great Britain?
Well, there's always an argument that says it will weaken Scotland's arm. I think it might have the opposite effect, that you might get more players committing to those countries if they can still take on the Aussies at the top level.
Right.
So I actually think you might see more good players at Wales, Scotland, Ireland, because they can commit to that country and still have the carrot of playing Australia, New Zealand on a tour.
Stevie Ward's an obvious one. Stevie Ward kind of on the fringes of the England squad. Will he, won't he be selected? But if he's not, he definitely will be playing for Wales.
Well, I'll give you another example of a young man playing for Huddersfield, young Oliver Roberts, who's broken through into the first team, you know, being selected every week now in the starting side. He's played for Ireland, obviously, and, you know, he's a perfect example of a player who, you know, if he develops further, might one day have to face...
Well, you should look at Ben Curry. Ben Curry was an Ireland international, and now he's...
But I do think that we are struggling for all, you know, kind of people whose names roll off the tongue, Dave, in terms of being legitimate.
But again, does that matter? If they take to the field and all 13 starters and all 4 benchmen are England players, does that damage the brand?
I don't think, no, but what to me, again, they've got to stick with these things long term, but it might encourage a Regan Grace in South Wales to think, hang on a minute, I can get on this Lions tour and play. So for me, I think that's the positive of it.
Because I mean, he could, Rhys Evans, when he first came to rugby league, well, not when he first came, but when he came through at Warrington, declared for England, didn't he? Because his mother's English. He's every right to do that. Whereas, I mean, I know he's Welsh again now, he's declared back for Wales, but that, as you say, that would encourage...
I think that carrot of still being able to represent your Wales, or whether it be Scotland or Ireland, and still play at the top level might strengthen those nations.
I think what's more important is that, you know, the 4 home nations. I do think we ought to be seeing those nations playing home games in their home countries. I think very disappointing
Scotland,
to see
especially.
Scotland not playing in Scotland.
Yeah.
You know.
Although it's always a great trip to Workington, but
Well,
and it does
yes.
feel like a spiritual home.
But just to close on the lines there, Dave, just thank God that they're back. You know, because I think it's a part of the sports heritage that we have really, really missed. And I think there's an opportunity to remarket and rebrand the international game around them.
Because the Aussies get it. If we take the Lions down to Sydney, etc., they get it. They understand the importance.
But it's going to take some rebuilding, though, because, you know, as
who's
Danny
the coach?
said, you know, well,
John Kerr.
Gosh,
The Wolves coach, John Kerr.
Darryl Powell, obviously. But
You say obviously.
you
Lee
know,
Radford. Lee Radford's hardly been mentioned in this.
Kieran
No.
Powell.
Right, well, thanks for those. And don't forget that you can take part as well. You can put your selfie in the mix for discussion in future weeks, future months, by going to at RL Backchat, and you'll get some instructions there as to how to do it. Okay. Right, we've also got some of your regular tweets, the old-fashioned tweets, as we have to call them now. This is from Viking Rod, who asks, why are so many players banned for minor offences retrospectively, with rules citing rules that wouldn't have got them sent off? Is that a legitimate? I see Stefan Ratchford's been up for a trip this week.
Yeah,
obviously the referee on the field saw it.
I think that's a great point. I do. If it's not a sending off offence on the day, why is it a ban afterwards? But it happens a lot, doesn't it?
It should have been a sin bin. It should have been a sin bin at the time, quite clearly.
But if the referee's seen it, I mean, it's all right if the referee's not seen it, then fair enough.
I think we are in danger of turning into a police state.
Yeah.
And I think that where you've got, you know, serious foul play and potentially dangerous elements to a game, well, then that's why we do have the match review panel. But I do think that we do risk making it Big Brother.
The big one is this contact with the referee.
I was going to say that.
It's just the bit.
Well, the referee's felt the contact.
Yeah.
And he's not done anything on the field.
And neither should he in most of these. Obviously, if he's been knocked off his feet and there's been some players that have done it more than once, then absolutely come down on it. But guys getting 1 and 2 match bans, I've seen some in League One this year on videos. That
ridiculous.
Barely believable, you know. It's not an act of foul play.
No, of course not.
We don't want players.
It's actually a friendly pat on the back normally,
sometimes,
isn't it?
yeah.
Let's face it.
Well,
it shouldn't be a ban. No.
Danny Hown in the cup tie put his arm around the referee to say we're kicking for goal, and in the current climate that could be a 2-match ban, couldn't it?
And I think it actually works to kind of alienate the referees at a time when we need to be more inclusive.
I'd be interested to hear the referee, because it's not them making this retrospective decision, is it? I'd be surprised if some of those guys thought it was a heinous crime for someone to come and put
It's just one of those things where occasionally the RFL has a hobby horse. Yeah. And this is just a hobby horse at the moment.
Absolutely, Martyn.
You know.
So are we agreeing with Viking Rod then that...
yeah.
Wow, look at that. Well, there you go. Viking. All sorted. Right, Neil Cromwell, lastly, because we're running out of time, is the restructure, the restructure being discussed at the moment by the RFL and the clubs, he asks, is the restructure yet another attempt at self-preservation by the RFL?
Not the RFL, no. This is the Super League clubs. I think this always gets lost in the background noise. People think that it's the RFL dictating terms on absolutely everything.
Yeah. They said they would review with all the stakeholders.
And they are they oversee the process, but ultimately it comes down to the vote of the Super League clubs as to what happens with their competition.
Yeah, the Super League clubs hate the Super 8s for one very simple reason. If you look at their gates in August and September, they've no time to promote those games. Their gates, just compared to the equivalent games earlier in the season, are way down. And they hate that. They really, and justifiably so, in my opinion. It's you can't promote games with only a week or two's, opportunity to market them. And we've got a system at the moment where at the start of the season, clubs can't publish their entire fixture lists, and that's got to be crazy. Surely, got to be crazy.
Yeah, in the league. Yeah.
In the league, yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Martyn on that point. For me, I know it's Super League and their competition, but I'm always an advocate of involving the whole professional game in these. It needs to be, because they need to see that other point of view. So you've got Hull KR now, who have been a terrific Super League club, haven't they? So all of a sudden, do they not get a say in it now? Because this year they're outside the champ. They're still getting 7,000 crowds, bigger than Super League. It has to be a decision involving the whole game, these things. They need to bring all the clubs into the table and say, this is our point of view.
Let me play devil's advocate. It's the Leeds, it's the Wigans, the big teams, the St Helens, the Warringtons, the Super League clubs who are bringing the money in, because they're the ones that the TV companies want to pay to watch. So why should your Battlers and your Rochdales have a say?
I kind of see that view, but Warrington at the moment...
That's Ian Lenigan's argument.
Warrington at the moment are in the bottom 4, so what happens if they get 6 bad injuries next week, they drop out of it? Is their opinion less next year because they've dropped down than it is this year? Not for me.
We do run the risk now of going back to the Civil War of 2 years ago when Ian Lenigan championed the cause basically for Super League to stand outside of the sport altogether.
Yeah.
And actually, you mentioned Lee Dranos, but Gary Etherington was a big champion of the holistic approach to how we manage the sport.
Well, Gary's the one exception to the rule I just talked about earlier. Gary's very much in favour of the current structure, unless, as he says, somebody can demonstrate something that's clearly better than it. And his argument is that nobody has. Whatever these discussions have been about, he thinks that nobody's put forward anything better than what we've got.
Yeah, I mean, we've said this time and time again on this programme, is that rugby league has constantly changed. In all the years that we've been watching the game, so many, this is the one now, this is the one now, this is the one now. So don't we just stick with something?
But for years it didn't change.
Because nothing's perfect.
Back in the old days, prior to 1973, there were 30 teams in one league, split into 2 conferences, Yorkshire and Lancashire effectively, with some inter-county games, and it was like that year after year after year.
Yeah.
And it worked pretty well, actually, but, eventually, the idea of promotion and relegation became too enticing, and they switched to 2 divisions, and actually that caused a great many problems, with a lot of clubs going out of business.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I don't think we'll ever get the perfect structure. You'll never get the perfect structure.
Well, you never know what it is, do you? Because we're always looking for the next better.
Yeah. We get excited about something and then get bored of it and say, let's go on to something else. Right, I'm bored of this now, so let's go on to something else. Let's go make a cup of tea or something like that. Thanks, fellas. That was a terrific chat, as ever. But let's just remind ourselves as what's coming up here on this channel over the next weekend, as far as the Rugby League is concerned, post State of Origin, of course. But these are the matches. On Friday at Mount Smart Stadium, Warriors against the Bulldogs. That's a 9 o'clock kickoff, and it's followed at 10:50 by the Tigers against the Titans. 3 matches on Saturday, back-to-back. It's the Raiders against the Broncos at 8:30, and then we've got the Roosters against the Storm at the Adelaide Oval at 10:30. With the Cowboys against the Panthers. And then on Sunday, the Dragons against the Knights at the Jubilee Oval, 5 a.m. start for that one. And then the Sharks against the Sea Eagles at 7 a.m. That's also on a Sunday. So those are the Australian games. And don't forget, we've still got that fabulous coverage of the Toronto Wolfpack, the next game against Hunslet. And they're going to keep up their 100% record. We shall see. And don't forget, you can check out all this and more at www.premiersports, don't forget the final s.tv. But that's as far as we go this month. Don't forget that you can take part in the programme at our Twitter account at RL Backchat, where you can post your video with your question or your point of view to our panel. But thanks to our panel for this month, Danny Lockwood, to Martyn Sadler and to Gareth Walker. Until next time, goodbye.